right, everybody. Hello, we are live. It's happy Friday to all of you. I hope you are doing well. Many stories to discuss. As always, we have Den here who is helping with moderation and taking your questions. So if you have any, leave them in the chat. Leave the super chat, leave them in the chat. Either way, we will get to them. You can also support this channel by going to patreon.com/Hemant. I appreciate it. And you can also subscribe to my newsletter at friendlyatheist.com. That's where all my articles first appear. So thank you for considering that. I hope you're having a good weekend. I am going to go ahead and get started here by talking about a Christmas parade that should be relatively inclusive and fun, and it is anything but that. And this is the 2024 Cookeville, Putnam County Christmas Parade in Tennessee. Something I knew nothing about like a week ago, and now I feel like I know everything about it. So this is supposed to be a huge local event, like for decades now, I think. The local PBS affiliate has carried this parade live, and they were scheduled to do it in mid-December because, and I'm just quoting from an article about this on the PBS website from last year. Check out what they said. The Cookeville Putnam County Christmas Parade is one of the community's most beloved traditions. I guess besides the spelling bee, allegedly. It will be great to once again see Cookeville residents and local families enjoying this annual extravaganza. So that's how they promoted it last year. PBS, I mean, I watched the video of this on YouTube, and honestly, it was cute. It was very local. It was obviously not a high, the quality of production. We're not talking like Monday Night Football. We're talking like a couple cameras, local anchors, and a whole bunch of people just going down the street representing their community organizations, their cute floats. It's a nice local thing, right? So anyway, that's what they were planning to do this year. And just like last year, if you want to participate in the parade, maybe your organization, maybe your high school or your civic group wants to march in the parade. Maybe you want to drive a car that becomes a float in the parade. That's fine. You have to just fill out an application so everyone is kind of aware of what you're doing. It helps the organizers space everybody out, make sure there's nothing over the line or anything, all well and good. So this year, people were looking at the application, and this is what they saw. So look at this. Okay, 2024 Cookeville Christmas Parade. Just some basic details. It's like a 12-page form. But if you zoom in here, look at what they're asking. None of this is weird. Tell us the name of your group, title of your float, description of your float. All that's fine. If you have a category you belong to, fine. And then people got to page 4. What is this? Statement of faith. We believe the Bible to be the inspired, the only infallible, authoritative word of God. Like, what? Why? What does that have to do with the parade? It gets actually really messed up closer to the bottom here. Look at the one at the very bottom on page 4. We believe God's plan for human sexuality is to be expressed only within the context of marriage, that God created man and woman as unique biological persons made for each other. God instituted monogamous marriage between male and female as the foundation of the family and the basic structure of human society. And for this reason, we believe that marriage is exclusively the union of one genetic male and one genetic female, which is a weird and very specific way to say we really don't like transgender people. So this goes on for like a page. Can't forget this one at the very top of the page here. We believe that human life is sacred from conception to its natural end. Like, you can't even, if you think it's not really a baby until birth, you're not allowed to join. And if you think people who are suffering at old age and want to take life, put life in their own terms and end it on their own terms, you're not allowed to march in the holiday parade either. Anyway, it's very specific. And then it just goes right back to normal stuff. Like, tell us the description of your entry. The rest of, there's nothing weird about the rest of it. It is just very specific and very Christian. You would expect to see that sort of contract when you're becoming a member of like a Southern Baptist church. Why is that in the Christmas parade? Because I will tell you that was not there last year. So that's very weird. Very specific, very weird. And then this statement of faith was shared by some very popular Twitter accounts. Specifically, this is the one that caught most people's attention, the Tennessee Holler. They tweeted, inbox, Cookville, the city's Christmas parade is requiring parade participants to sign a statement of faith, including a belief in the Bible, Jesus, only man-woman marriage, they forgot genetic, anti-abortion, and anti-trans, and the local PBS station is carrying it. So they shared this and it went viral and people got really mad about it. And like sometime last week, I started making calls. I called the PBS or like the local PBS affiliate and I asked them, like, I just want to know if you guys are still airing this now that it has become a no Jews allowed, no Muslims allowed, no atheists, no progressive Christians allowed. It's such a very specific event for a specific group of people. I wanted to know if the PBS affiliate would carry it. They did not return my phone call. I talked to someone at the city. Maybe I forgot if I talked to the city official or the Chamber of Commerce, but like none of these people knew what the hell was going on. The Chamber of Commerce said, we may have sponsored this thing last year, but we have nothing to do with it this year. The city has said on its website, like there's nothing about this parade on the city or county's website. So there is no government involvement here whatsoever, which makes this really interesting because they advertise this as the 2024 Cookville Christmas Parade, but the city of Cookville is saying we have nothing to do with this. And the Chamber of Commerce, which is not like an elected board or anything, but they're saying we have nothing to do with this. It seems like churches just took total control of the Christmas parade, slapped their statement of faith on the application, and they're treating this like an extension of their church. And in fact, that is what happened. Life Church and River Community Church appear to be the two local churches in charge of this. And they made it clear in the application the city has nothing to do with any of this except for like a liability waiver you have to sign. Like if you slip and fall on the road, you have to promise you're not going to sue the city over that or anything like that. Now, what made this interesting is this is not the first controversy that has happened with this parade. Last year, when the city and county had nothing to do with it, but the Chamber of Commerce did, this is what happened last year. Someone from a local pride organization, Upper Cumberland Pride, they filled out an application to be in the parade. They wanted a float. They wanted to have their group celebrated. And you could see from this article, we were told we could not be in the parade because we're not family friendly. And specifically, the Chamber of Commerce, the committee, said they voted that it was in the safety interests of all involved to not allow the Upper Cumberland Pride entry to participate. And I remember I saw that and I'm like, what do they think the gay people were going to do? Do they think they're going to wear like skimpy leather or nothing and dance around? Like, what were they afraid was going to happen during a Christmas parade? And in fact, the group said, our theme was Don We Now Our Gay Apparel. Very clever. We were planning to come out in couture fashion and voguing. I believe the word is couture there. But basically, they were going to wear fashionable stuff and they were going to dance. I can't do it. Nothing about that is not safe. Nothing about that is unfamily friendly. Like, what the hell were they so afraid of? But this is what happened last year. That was the big controversy. The gay group, the LGBT pride group, was not allowed to join in. And in fact, in a different article, someone asked the group why they were a threat to the parade. And this is what they said. Were you going to wear anything like scandalous? And they said, in no way, no Madonna cone bra. We would be completely covered head to toe. It's going to be 30 degrees outside. No one's coming out there in booty shorts. So that's last year. Like the big controversy is that the Chamber of Commerce is involved and they banned the LGBT pride group from coming. But guess what? The Chamber of Commerce is no longer involved in this festivity. 2 churches are. And now it seems like nobody's allowed to participate in this group. But here's what happened. The Chamber of Commerce said we're not participating, and they basically ceded all the territory to the churches, and now no one's allowed to join in. The weirdest thing about the entire event, it seems, is that the people who signed the statement of faith also have to say they won't dress up as Santa, because guess what, kids? Santa's already making an appearance at the parade. And I honestly don't get why a conservative Christian organization is having a Christmas parade where everyone has to pledge allegiance to Jesus, and they're having like Rudolph and Santa and all the other signs of secular holidays that usually Christians tend to not like. Like, I don't know why they don't just have a giant nativity scene running through the whole parade. Why are you even bothering with secular anything at this point? I don't know. But the big question that remained is, why is PBS going to air this on their station? Because now that it's a church-run event and non-conservative Christians are not allowed to be a part of it, why is PBS promoting this? And this is what was interesting. They didn't return my call, but they posted this on Facebook last week. Let me share this with you. A message from WCTE. We have become aware of the recently posted application regarding the event titled Cookeville Christmas Parade. The station and its employees have not been involved in drafting the document. We were not informed of its contents prior to the release. ... Look at this part right here. The Upper Cumberland Broadcast Council and WCTE PBS are in consultation with their legal advisors and will issue an official statement as soon as it's completed. To me, what that says is, damn, we signed a contract saying we would air this thing, and now they changed the rules on us, so we're going to talk to our lawyers to see if we can get out of this, because we don't know, but we need to respond to you somehow. The city of Cookeville also responded to the statement of faith, and they're like, stop blaming us, stop writing to us, stop calling us, this has nothing to do with us. They say, while the parade has certainly been a welcome tradition for the residents of the city, it simply has never been produced by the city in many decades. This year, the chamber has decided not to put on the Christmas parade, but a local private group sponsored by local churches has asked to put on their own parade. The city had nothing to do with any of this. ... It's extremely unfortunate that something like a Christmas parade has become such a controversial event, but we're not involved in this event at all. Like, my dudes, you handed it over basically to a Christian group, and now you're surprised it became controversial? What did you think was going to happen? That they would be like, everyone's welcome here? When have conservative Christian churches ever done that about anything? Anyway, the city is right, though. They have nothing to do with this. People should stop blaming them. I think that's a fair thing for the city to point out. But what's going to happen now? Because think about this. Churches are allowed to apply for street closures and permits, and they can rent police protection. This is not a church-state separation issue, but the city can't entirely distance itself from what's happening. But the bottom line is that because the event is run by churches, guess what happened? The event that used to be a big local community tradition has become entirely defined by its bigotry and who the Christian organizers want to keep out. No Jews allowed, no atheists allowed, whatever. It's no longer a celebration of the holidays. And I think people in those communities should keep that in mind when they are wondering, should we attend as a family? No. So here's what has happened since then. This just happened, like, I think a day or two ago, but PBS just issued an update. This, after careful review of concerns raised, blah, 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 about all this, WCTE and the Upper Cumberland Broadcast Council have determined the station will not air the planned Christmas parade for 2024, but will do something else instead. Okay, fine. So PBS somehow decided we can get out of this contract. We're not going to participate in it, which is very interesting because I imagine the Christian churches that took over this event said to themselves, you know what everyone loves? This Christmas parade. Why don't we take charge of it and we'll use it as advertisement for our churches? And now the only way that was getting broadcast to the community through PBS is saying, yeah, dog, we're not doing this at all, which means this event is no longer going to be seen by anybody except the attendees. And over the next couple of weeks, you can guarantee that when people talk about this event, it's going to be about the hate that is defining this parade and the exclusivity, and not the let's bring people together to celebrate Jesus or anything like that. Right? Which, I don't know, that seems to defeat the purpose of the parade. And I think it has now backfired on the churches that are running this thing. And making things even more interesting, I saw this as well. A local community group has decided to put on its own parade that is inclusive. If you go to GoFundMe right now, you can contribute to this community parade on December 2nd. They've already raised $4,000, which is very impressive. And this is the person creating this is Montana Chambers. She runs a small business, a witchy shop. And you could see here, Christian fascism is alive and well, but me and some other folks are determined to not let that stand and to create our own inclusive holiday parade, which is wonderful. That sounds amazing. I love that this is the response in a part of Tennessee that is relatively rural. They're saying, fine, if Christians are taking over this thing and they're making it worse, the rest of us are going to come together and have something that involves our entire community, and it's centered around love and inclusivity. And then fine, Christians 2 weeks later, they can have their little hate party if they want, which that's the right way to respond to this. I love it. And I'm so excited that this seems to have a happy ending. Though the better ending would be if the city found a way to take charge of this in the future and turned it into something everyone can participate in. But for now, I'll take it. All right. I'm going to stop there for now. What questions do we have? What comments do we have? So, a parade requires a statement of faith. When it's run by Christians, yeah, it does, apparently. How are they even going to check? This is what I was wondering. I know participants have to sign the statement of faith, but let's say you lie about it and you think women are people. Like, what are they going to do to figure out that you don't actually believe any of that stuff? What are you? Do you have to take a test beforehand? Are they going to ask you questions like TSA at an airport? I don't know. They're taking it, I assume, on the honor code. But seriously, you could just lie and say you want to participate and no one's going to stop you. Is Cookeville going to provide police or fire trucks in the parade or for the public? Seems like people would need to pay for that. My understanding of that is they might, but just like any outside event, the people organizing the event would have to pay for it. And it's in their hands. Like in my community, there is a church that when they have services on Sunday, they kind of ruin traffic on a really busy road. And they have police who guide the traffic around there. But it's the church's responsibility to pay for those cops who are basically doing work outside of their, day job to do that stuff. And that's fine. That's not a church state situation either, as long as the organizers have filed the proper paperwork, they're paying whatever they need to pay, then fine. That's actually not that big of a deal. PBS is one of the things Trump wants to defund. No kidding. Public anything Trump wants to defund. And this idea that they're not going to show the Christian service, that's the right move. But you can imagine in a certain type of government, they would receive a lot of retaliation for that. People, if you haven't voted, go vote. Vote for the Democrats. What are you doing? What is wrong with you at this point if you haven't? Don't wait till election day. Things might happen. You might get distracted. Don't wait till election day. Go do it this weekend. There's early voting a lot of places. All right. I like that. Sign our statement of faith. The statement of faith is you have to obey me and everything I say, or else. I'm sure Den can pull up that statement of faith somewhere. Give me 1 second here to close some tabs. Let's get to the next story here. Okay. So get this. In 2017, there was a guy named Joe Nicola He's a pastor at New Covenant Ministries in Independence, Missouri. And he wrote on his personal website that basically he didn't really buy into this idea that people have mental illnesses, at least not the way we think about it. He basically said there couldn't possibly be anything wrong with our brains because God gave us those brains. So, where would people's mental illnesses be coming from? And he had the answer. Let me show you what he said because I know you know where this is going. This is what he wrote: mental illness or demon possession? What could it be? Sorry, there you go. There it is. And if you scroll down here, I'll blow this up a little bit. Let me say right off that I am not saying mental illness does not exist. I do believe, however, that we are overlooking a very important scriptural truth: demon possession. Demon possession is real and is more common than we may think. Not one person that Jesus dealt with was diagnosed mental illness. Weird grammar, but okay. Not one. The Bible tells us they were demon possessed, and the only way to deal with it is to cast the demon out, not give it drugs. And apparently that's supposed to mean that's how we should do it too. Just go ooga booga Jesus stuff, and that's how you cure PTSD or something like that. Like it's a horrible thing to say. It reveals this guy's ignorance about everything. And the sad thing is he's not even alone. There are other pastors. I think Greg Locke, the Christian hate preacher from Tennessee, said a couple years ago that he claimed autism was the work of the devil. And he got a ton of backlash from Christians who had kids who were on the spectrum. And they were like, this is not the devil. There's nothing wrong with my child. But anyway, it's one thing for this pastor to say all this. It would be another if he was like, it would be one thing if he was just in his Christian silo where he shared this with his Christian buddies and no one else ever heard about it. But why bring this up? Because this dude is now running for office. Joe Nicola is the Republican nominee for a Missouri state Senate seat. And if he gets elected, he would have the power, some power, to decide how to spend taxpayer dollars on things like addressing mental illness. And that should be scary to everyone who read what he just wrote. Like, should anyone be worried that he's going to try to spend that money on Bibles and he's going to say, what? This is a secular therapist center or something? And do we want people to be able to have access to medicine to treat their mental illness? No, because they need Jesus. They just need to go to church. So we're not going to pay for that. Like, it could end very badly here. And this has now become a campaign issue, so much so that this guy has now responded on YouTube with the video titled, and I'm not kidding, this is the title, Response to Mental Illness, which is a horrible title for a video. But I'm going to share with you just like 2 clips from this video where he's responding to the things he said, because he's like, you guys, stop being mad at me for what I wrote all those years ago. Okay, here's the clip.
There are many causes of mental illness. Most often, it is a result of some form of trauma. I am also a pastor, and in that capacity, I have the responsibility to preach and teach from the scriptures, as well as help people heal from all sorts of trauma in their lives. I'm not a mental illness expert, but I have helped many people find healing over the years in my ministry. I'm certainly not against using medications. I am for finding solutions and real healing.
All the enthusiasm of a hostage video. Listen, at no point, I know I just clipped a couple of things there, but the full video is under 3 minutes and he doesn't say anything else of substance. At no point in that video does he say demons have nothing to do with mental illness. And claiming that mental illness is mostly the result of trauma, that's not just false, because biological factors that are out of your control arguably play a bigger role. It just moves the goalposts. Because even if he says it's the result of trauma, what do you think he blames that trauma on? Satan. Of course he does. Like, it always comes back to the devil with this guy. So he's trying to weasel his way out of it by saying, okay, it's not mental illness caused by Satan. Mental illness is caused by trauma. And trauma is caused by, oh no, I ran out of time. Don't ask me that question. it allows guys like this to say Satan is responsible for the underlying causes without saying that out loud. And then he says, I'm certainly not against using medications, but what he doesn't tell you is, like, is he okay with people just using medications? Or does he say you need drugs, fine, but only when it comes with a dose of Jesus? Like, notice what he's not saying there. So that's just one issue where this pastor, this extreme right-wing pastor, has gotten in trouble for things he has said. What else has he said? Well, let me show you. And I can show you this stuff from his personal website because he tried to scrub it from the interwebs, but the screenshots were saved and the Internet Archive saved it. So here's another thing from his personal website. Here we go. Just look at the menu at the top. You got your homepage, your about page. What's highlighted here? COVID-19 and the shots. We got an entire page for that one. And all it is vaccine denial and COVID misinformation. We made a big mistake with the vaccines. He's just quoting crazy people. This goes on for a while. This page is so long. And it's just one of those guys who's like, I did my own research. Now let me send you 100 links to misinformation websites that are all saying the same BS. It's all lies. It's horrible. It's horrible. But that's just another thing this guy has done. Not only did he spread lies about the virus and vaccines, he refused to close his church during the worst of the pandemic. This is another, you know what else is on his website? Check this out. He has an entire page dedicated to enemies within the church. And let's take a look at this here. In the 1930s, some Christian churches in Germany compromised with the Nazis, and some even had a picture of Hitler and a Nazi flag. For the sake of this, I'm going to assume he means that's bad. You never know today. And then he goes on to say, today, some churches are flying a different flag, a rainbow flag. So this guy is now equating the Nazi flag with the rainbow flag. Like, what the hell? Wait, it gets better. It gets better. He has, on the same page, this is my favorite. He had a list of all the things Christians today are being deceived by. And what do you think that would include? Like, I imagine if you asked me to make that list, somewhere at the top it'd be like, well, they're deceived by trans people. They're deceived by progressive Christians. But look at the list of what he's talking about here. All right, let's see. Christianity is being targeted. The evangelical community is the last bulwark of our Judeo-Christian constitutional republic. Yada, yada, yada. What else? What else? What else? Many have already been deceived and are spreading Marxist socialism propaganda supported by twisting scripture, whether knowingly or unknowingly, using terms like social justice, racism, white privilege, compassion, common ground, generosity, tolerance, acceptance, and unity, while perverting the true biblical definition and context. This guy is mad because some Christians are like, we're against racism. We're like for compassion. We're for generosity. And he's like, you've all been deceived. How dare you pervert what the Bible says? Like, what does the Bible say about generosity that this guy's very much against? And he goes on, the list is not done. What else do these liberal duped Christians promote? Globalism, sustainability, social justice, immigration, environmentalism, collectivism, economic justice, climate change, critical race theory, and other agendas are being used to prey on the heartstrings of Christians, to change Christianity in America by moving us into socialism. He already said that above. But also, again, what are they talking about? Immigration? Yeah, we're letting people in who want to be here and who contribute to our society. And he's like, what? But they're brown. We can't allow that to happen. It just goes on like this for a while. Look at that bottom line. Normal is not going to cut it. And then he gets to that Nazi thing we already talked about. This dude is horrible. Like, what the hell? By the way, I didn't get a video of this because the audio quality was terrible. But he gave a sermon a couple of days after January 6, 2021, after the insurrection attempt by Donald Trump. And he falsely blamed that attack on, quote, the Antifa and anarchists that were the instigators. And then this may be even scarier. He said this to the congregation. Let me ask the question, is it ever right for a believer to be violent? And his congregation yells back, yeah. And then what does he say in response? He's like, I hear you, basically. He said, it's a little troubling to me, to be quite honest. I'm not advocating violence, but I am advocating freedom. Freedom at all costs and freedom for whatever it takes. And you know it's never good when someone says, I'm not advocating violence, but that's what this guy did. There's also another video online of him at a Republican fundraiser. And Missouri is one of those states where abortion is on the ballot, and there's a constitutional measure to enshrine reproductive freedom in the state constitution. And what he told the Republican crowd is basically, we all need to be really careful about how we talk about abortion, because if you go completely anti-abortion, he called it a candidate killer. It's making us look really bad. But he told the crowd, if you elect me, don't worry, I'm going to work with Republicans to like overrule this ballot measure everyone's working on. Like, he's not good at being subtle about any of this stuff. And the last thing I want to point out is there's a campaign ad in which he said Missouri should decouple from the federal government when it comes to spending money on education. He wants to reject federal support for the public education system. And there's a Democratic Political Action Committee that said that would burn a $3.6 billion hole in our state's public education budget. Nicola apparently said the federal government only supports like 10% of our state's education budget. Actually, the number's closer to 40%. But this guy wants to do away with it all because he wants the government out of education. So that's scary. I'll show you a couple other things in an article. This is from the Kansas City Star here. Here we go. Nicola, in a July interview with the Star, said he teaches his congregation to be an active part of society, including politics. His church also donated money to a PAC that supports his candidacy. That's shady. A move questioned by legal experts. There's no such thing as separation of church and state, he said. That's a misnomer. It is not. It's not a misnomer. But this is what he said months ago. And I think there was one other thing here in this article. Maybe, there we go. There is the Democratic candidate in the race. His name, I just want to make sure I have it right here. His name is Robert Sauls, and he weighed in on this, and he was not as cutthroat as I wanted him to be. But look at what Robert Sauls said. He was troubled by Nicola's post, saying it raised questions. This is the mental illness post. It raised questions about how he would handle policy decisions, such as funding for the Missouri Department of Mental Health. I can tell you that PTSD is a real thing. It's not demonic possession. It's not something that, you can just hope that it goes away, right? Or pray for it to go away. Mental health is a very real thing. And if you live in this society, you see it on an ongoing basis. Yeah. This should not be a close race. You have one obviously normal, good, fine candidate, and you have a batshit crazy religious nut job who has spent the last several years spreading lies about everything. And I wish this guy would come out and just say that his batshit craziness is a direct result of his religious delusions, but that's why he's a candidate and I'm not, because he's nice. And by the way, that personal website where he posted all that stuff, he tried taking it down. The fact that he is trying to distance himself from his Christian beliefs, like you saw in that video earlier, should be a warning to everybody. He has not changed his mind about his views, about mental illness, about COVID, about anything. He's just afraid of people finding out what those views are. Like, the strategy is straightforward. If you lie in the name of Jesus, God will forgive you, right? So as long as you get to impose Christian nationalist ideas across the state, do whatever it takes to get into office. The other option, I guess, would be honest about your views and then get pilloried by voters who don't want Christian extremists taking over their state at a time when basic human rights are literally on the ballot. So, if you live in Missouri, if this guy is someone on your ballot, be careful. Don't vote for him. Just save yourself the hassle. Vote for the Democrats in general. It's just good life advice. All right. What questions we got here? I didn't believe in demon possession until I got cats. Well, see, that's just your fault now. Now you know better, Robin. I'm schizophrenic. I've been told by people I thought were saying that I'm not schizophrenic, that I just need an exorcist to rid me of demons. He was totally serious. Listen, guys, if you have a mental illness, there's nothing to be ashamed about, but you do need help. And going to an exorcist is not going to help you. Therapy can help, medication can help. It's not a demon. You don't need to go to church to get any of this resolved. Scary that anyone would think that. I'm not a mental health expert, so let me help you with your mental health issues. That's scary too, right? Because he said in that video that he has personally healed people with mental illness. I assume at church, where he did the Oogie Boogie magic spell and said he healed them. And clearly that's not going to do the trick. So what does he think he did? That's scary to think about. Here's the thing: I don't need him to be an expert in mental health. That's not why anyone would elect him. He's not being elected to be the expert in everything. But you elect people who know what they don't know, who know when they need to rely on experts, instead of making up the solutions and then pretending like you know what you're talking about. He wears his ignorance like a badge of honor. I know, and that badge is the R after his name. All right. Oh, thanks for that donation, Joshua. So apparently Florida decided not to accept my, I assume, voter registration because I used an electronic pen to sign, and they sent me this after the deadline passed. Is there a way to still register? Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what Florida's laws are about that. But you should check with your local county person in charge of the elections. Check with your local Democratic groups because they can point you to the best way to get registered. I don't know the answer to that, but man, Florida does everything it can to stop people from voting. So if the answer is sorry, you can't vote, that would not surprise me at this point. Ooh, yeah. If you go to Vote Save America, it's run by the guys who run Pod Save America. I believe they have ways of helping you register to vote and also how you can volunteer as well, especially in swing states right now. Thanks for putting that up, Den. You could subscribe over here. I'm going to close some stuff here and get to the next story. Give me 1 second. Ooh, you're going to hate this dude. Yes. All right. Let me pull this. All right. Did you know white evangelical churches are very patriarchal? How patriarchal? Well, there is a Christian pastor named Joel Webbin, and he said during a recent sermon that he's very concerned about this idea that women who accuse men of sexually assaulting them, like all that stuff we heard about during, #MeToo, he thinks they're all liars. Women are liars, he says, basically. And he really thinks they're all falsely accusing men of rape and sexual assault, and he wants them punished for it. And so he was giving a sermon at Covenant Bible Church in Georgetown, Texas, which is not too far from Austin. And he basically said that if you make false accusations against other people, ancient Israeli law had a punishment in store for you. And that punishment was that if you accuse someone else of a crime and it turned out your accusation was false, your punishment should be whatever the punishment would have been for the other person if your allegation were true. So if they would have been punished for with 5 years in prison for whatever they did, but you lied about them doing it, you get 5 years in prison. Well, what happens if the alleged crime warranted the death penalty? Well, he says the lying accuser should be put to death. And so, to connect all those dots, he says if a woman accuses a man of rape, and in the Bible, rape was a crime punishable by death, but a woman lies about the fact that she was raped, then we should execute her. That's where he's going with this, and I'm going to play you a clip of him saying what I just told you.
In Israel, and this should be the law of the land in our country and every country still to this day. This is a timeless principle, a timeless universal truth. If you perjure yourself by bearing false witness, accusing somebody else, whatever the penalty would have been for that person, had they been found guilty, then that penalty should fall on your head for falsely accusing them. So if you accuse in a court of law, falsely accuse someone of murder, and it turns out in the final analysis that that person is not guilty of murder, and neither are you, but you falsely accuse them of murder, and the penalty for murder should be capital punishment, life for life, then you, even though you have not committed murder, because you falsely accused someone else for murder, and the penalty for that crime would have been death, you should be put to death. That's what the text is saying. And if that were to occur, and the just penalties were to be enforced, you, the false accuser, is now put to death, and that's a public death. It's a public sentence, publicly carried out. Then the citizens of these United States of America, you know what they would do? Hashtag Me Too would end real fast. How do you, false accusing? Playing the victim when you're actually not? Like, you know how to end that real fast? All you have to do is publicly execute a few women who have lied.
There you go, everybody. If we just publicly execute a few women, Me Too would end real fast. Because that's really the problem. It's Me Too, the Me Too movement. By the way, some members of his congregation kind of gasped when he said that. I don't know if that came through in the clip. But in the original sermon, Webben basically said, quote, "There are nicer ways to say that. The reason I say things the way I do is because I'm convinced there's not a better way to say it. I think that's precisely the way to say it." And the thing is, even though he thinks rapists should suffer the same fate, state-sponsored execution, you can tell that he's more concerned about the women who supposedly lie, not the men who actually commit the crimes. The women get him more riled up. So Right Wing Watch shared this video, and this is what Joel Webben actually responded to their tweet about this. And he's like, yeah, that is what I said. The biblical penalty for rape is death. Therefore, if a woman lies about being raped, the biblical penalty for her is also death. That is what I clearly taught in the sermon, which is not the flex you wanted. Like, you expect the right-wing people to be like, you're taking me out of context. He's like, yeah, that is what I said, and I am proud of it. So that's very disturbing. But there are so many problems with this weird Christian fantasy of his, none of which took up any time in his sermon. The obvious one is, guess what? Rapists today, as evil as they are not put to death. So even if that was the penalty in the Bible, it's not our law. And conservative Christian pastors, no matter how much they whine about being persecuted, have never really spent much time pushing for harsher sentences for men who commit sins. Because if they did, they might have to say goodbye to a lot of their church buddies and preferred political candidates. He also said Me Too would end real fast if we started publicly executing certain women. But why would it end? Because the movement was not about false allegations. It was about women sharing stories about how they've been survivors of abuse in order to let other women know they are not alone. Unless, of course, you believe the women telling these stories include a whole bunch of liars, which is apparently the case with this dude. And then I have to wonder, how would they know that the woman is lying? Because, I mean, obviously, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Many women don't speak up at all after being sexually assaulted because they're aware of the negative repercussions that might await them. Even if they speak up at all, we have seen what happens. They are targeted, harassed, threatened. And even if they have the courage to deal with all that, it is still incredibly hard sometimes to prove that a man committed the crime. Just ask all the prominent atheists who have been accused of sexual assault only to bounce right back from it. Or ask Brett Kavanaugh or Donald Trump. Like, what happens if a woman makes a true allegation, but the evidence doesn't exist because it's a he said, she said thing? At what point do you say she's telling the truth about it? What if she backs away after making an accusation because of all the threats she's receiving? And maybe she says, you know what, this isn't worth it. I'm just going to suck it up and deal with it. There have been women who have said they've done that. Like, does that then count as a lie? How does this dude know when a woman is lying? How does he get that information? And what happens if a woman has the courage to say this person abused them and then he is not legally charged with it? Is that enough for the government to execute his accuser? Joel Webbin did not elaborate. And again, all of that is before we even get into the genuinely hazy situations where maybe the assault doesn't become apparent to the survivor until long after it happened. Maybe you thought, oh, this is just something boys do. We were playing around. And you realize much later in life, like, oh, no, that was not okay, what that guy did to me. So if this dude's law, his fantasy law, went into effect, the end result would be more men, I think, more men raping women, because women would be pressured to keep quiet about it, or else they will be accused of telling a lie. I don't think he cares about that. By the way, the Houston Chronicle did an article about what this guy said. And one of the interesting things they point out in their piece, the scenario Webbin is imagining about false accusations is rare. According to the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, the incidence of false report of sexual assault is between 2 and 8%. And as you can imagine, it's really hard to get stats on these things. So this is like probably a much higher projection than it actually is. What else? I mean, none of this is surprising coming from this dude. This is a guy, there was a really interesting article in Mother Jones recently by the journalist Kiera Butler, where she talked about Theo bros, who are like ultra right-wing Christian pastors who are they just troll you on the internet. They say provocative things. They do it in the name of Jesus. They always justify like guys like this, Joel Webbin, saying what he says and then saying there's biblical justification for it. That's a Theo bro move. And this is also a guy who, by the way, on his ministry's website, here's how bad this guy is. He keeps a running list of all the controversies he's been involved with, as if it's a badge of honor. Look at this. Does a husband have authority over what books his wife reads? Because apparently he said something like that. And the answer is, yeah, he totally said that. And he said, there was a time when I asked my wife not to read a particular book. It was about something, child baptism or something. And here's what I said about it. Who keeps a running list of all their controversies? It's like his own personal Wikipedia page of all the horrible things he believes. So there's that. So that's disturbing. He has also said that Christians who willingly live in California are stupid. And by the way, if you think, okay, this is just some troll saying something provocative, so hey, people like me will talk about it, I want to tell you this is much more serious than that. There is an Oklahoma state senator named Dusty Devers. I've talked about him before. He is also a Theo bro, a pastor who actually got elected to office because he's a right-wing Republican. And Dusty Devers actually proposed a bill this session. Here it is. Again, proposed in 2024. And guess what this would do? It shall be unlawful to willfully, knowingly, and without probable cause make a false report to any person of any crime. And look at this at the bottom. Any person convicted of violating this thing shall be guilty of a misdemeanor. If the false report accused a person of a misdemeanor, any person convicted of violating the provision, blah, 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 shall be guilty of a felony. And the penalty for such false The penalty for such misdemeanor or felony shall be the same as the provisions for such offense of the accused crime in the false report. This is a bill that enacts what Joel Webbin wanted to have happen to women who made false accusations of rape against men. He said he wanted women to be publicly executed if they falsely accused a man of raping them. Dusty Devers filed a bill saying we should totally make that a law. Now, I don't know, is this good news that even Oklahoma was like, yeah, dude, we are not taking up this bill right now? But it was proposed. And that's the power that these Theo bros actually have. This is not wishful thinking. This is not just crazy extremist Christian fantasies. This is what Project 2025 is. It's taking the worst ideas that Christian pastors have and turning them into law. Even if this law did not get passed in Oklahoma, if this guy stays in office, Devers, what's stopping him from just proposing this law next time around? Maybe the legislature will be more accepting of it. Some scary things to think about. I also want to point out, this is from Right Wing Watch. They also pointed out that Joel Webbin has a history of saying horrible things. In 2023, Webbin was among the contributors to a document called the Statement on Christian Nationalism and the Gospel, drafted by Christian nationalists like Devers, former Trump administration official William Wolf, and others. The document declared that the U.S. must formally acknowledge the lordship of Christ in all its laws, abolish abortion, outlaw marriage equality, and recapture our national sovereignty from godless global entities who present a grave threat to civilization. These guys are the grave threats to civilization. But this is not a game for these people. They very much want to see this all turn into law. And by the way, that means if women want to exercise any kind of control over their body, they would not be able to if this dude got his way. He doesn't trust them to begin with. He won't allow them to read whatever they want. And he expects women to be controlled first by their fathers, then immediately followed by their husbands. There is no in between there. This is not a fringe pastor. I have covered fringe pastors in the past. This guy is not a fringe dude, but he does share the bloodlust of like the new IFB dudes. They fantasize about the government executing gay men. This guy wants the government to execute lying women. And they're all basing their fantasies on Old Testament law as if that's the best way to go. Now, I said this guy is not a fringe pastor. I should tell you, it's not like his church is big. Actually, the Daily Mail, which I know is not a good source of information, but in this case, yes, they said this guy, his church is run out of a roadside restaurant outside Austin. And so it's small. He literally does church service out of like an empty warehouse in a sense. You can't find it on a map. But his social media has like 200,000 followers. And that's kind of the whole point. He doesn't have a big congregation, but he has a big following, and that following can do some really dangerous things. Oh, by the way, I want to show you one other thing he tweeted, just the last thing. Here, just you can read this for yourself. During a live stream about whether Christian nationalism has a racism problem, Pastor Joel Webbin said he chose a white doctor over a black doctor because of the likelihood that the black doctor did not have to prove as much merit. Like, what? Black doctors still graduate from medical school, and this guy's like, yeah, I don't think they really did. I don't trust them. This is what his brand of Christianity is like, though. Like, and that's the kind that's on the ascendance. And that is one of the reasons I'm deeply worried about Donald Trump winning. Because it's not that he would put this dude in power, but he would absolutely put dudes like him in positions of power. All right. I'll stop there for now. What other questions do we have? Oh, thanks, Carla. These pro-life Christians all in support of execution. Sounds about right. Yeah, they love the death penalty too. Same dudes who are like, thou shalt not kill. They're all about pro-life. And they're like, well, we should totally kill people in certain situations. Yes, the hypocrisy is noted. There are definitely women in his congregation who were assaulted who now know they have zero support. Kristen, that's a very interesting comment. I thought about that. Like, what would the women in his congregation think? And the fact is, I don't know how many women are in that congregation. They would not be allowed to go solo. Their husbands would have to drag them there. But also, if you're the sort of woman whose husband belongs to a church like this, I have to wonder how much original individual thought you have at that point. Have you drank the Kool-Aid at that point? Or do you really think they're like, well, I can't trust this man? Well, then why'd you marry into this sort of thinking? Right? So, I mean, I worry that you might be right, but I also don't know. I worry that you might not be right because I don't know that any women in his congregation think that. Let me actually, Den, if you can go back for a second, I will say when like run of the mill Christian pastors say things like this, though, and they downplay sexual violence and they promote patriarchy and things like that, then I absolutely have that concern. With Joel Webbin, he's so extreme that I'm like, I think he already weeded out women who could think for themselves. I can't think of a single example of a woman who publicly accused a man of sexual assault and somehow benefited from it. No kidding. I mean, do you remember there was a cover, maybe it was New York Magazine, and they had a very striking cover of all the women who accused Bill Cosby of sexually assaulting them. And a lot of them who went public about it, and there were dozens and dozens of women on that cover, a lot of them were harassed and they were threatened. And one of the comments made in response to them is, you're just trying to get money. You're just trying to get notoriety or fame out of this. And the question I want to throw out there is, name one of them. Name one of the women who got famous because they accused Bill Cosby of sexual assault. And even if that's an extreme example, I don't think it is. But yes, to your point, Joe, like, who are these women who publicly accused a man of sexual assault and benefited from it? You think it's good to be Christine Blasey Ford right now? Or Anita Hill or anyone like that? Like, I don't think their lives are necessarily better because they went public with their accusations. If anything, their life was flipped because they went public about it. And thank goodness they have the courage to do it. But their life was not made better or easier. They did not get rich off of it or anything like that. So what's the punishment for those who are responsible for all of the untested rape kits all over the country? Well, if Joel Webbin has his way, they will get promoted in the police department. I believe that's how it works. Ever notice that Israel doesn't use those laws? Well, my understanding is Israel's government doesn't use any laws right now. But yes, fair point. I think false prophets get stoned, right? That's an interesting question. There's a lot of guys who claim to speak for God, on behalf of God. God speaks to them. What happens with them? Yeah, what's the punishment for like the Greg Locke types? I accuse Hemant of being a billionaire. I win. Sadly, yeah, that's a false accusation, I'm sad to say. All right, go sign up right there. I'm going to jump to this next story. Just a prelude before I start it. Every now and then I tweet things and they sometimes take off. I tweeted about this next story. I don't think I've ever seen more people sharing anything than this story I'm about to tell you. But basically, here's the backdrop here. I want to tell you about a guy named Zach Radcliffe. And I'll show you a page from Liberty University's website because they love Zach Radcliffe. In fact, this is what they posted about the guy in 2019. Liberty alumnus debuts patriotic song as part of national conference. Well, let's see what they say here. Basically, Zach Radcliffe up here was invited to perform at CPAC, the insane conference for crazy right-wing people, and they were proud of him, so they wanted to promote him. It was an opportunity I've dreamed about for a long time, said LU alumnus and songwriter Zach Radcliffe, who debuted his new single, I'll Stand. during a portion of CPAC. To be able to stand up at my alma mater with the people that I love and the people who crafted my musicianship and songwriting, it is a surreal feeling. Unbelievable. Only God could have brought this about. There was actually video that Liberty University posted of Zach playing his song at CPAC, and right behind him in the corner is Jerry Falwell Jr., because I think it took place at Liberty University. And it's just like, oh, that did not age well at all. But okay, there's Liberty University saying, this is one of our guys. He's performing at CPAC. We're so proud of him. By the way, who is Zach Radcliffe besides that? He's also the worship director at Oakwood Church in Michigan, which is a pretty big church. He's a big supporter of Donald Trump, as you could see from his Instagram page. And you will never guess what happened to this dude. I'll give you one guess. Let me just share with you the front page from a newspaper, the headline. Church leader charged with sexually abusing children. Let's scroll down, shall we? Zachary Joseph Radcliffe, 29, was arraigned on a charge of first-degree criminal sexual conduct, 2 charges of aggravated child sexually abusive activity, 2 charges of child sexually abusive activity, and 6 charges of using the internet to communicate with another to commit a crime. He faces up to life in prison. My God. What the hell did this guy do? Right? And then you find out what he did. And listen, trigger warning, I guess it's very disturbing stuff. Penal codes cited in court documents indicate Radcliffe is accused of producing child sexually abusive material, including material with a prepubescent child, a video, or more than 100 images. And the charges date back as far back as June of 2014. He's 29 now. That means he was doing this when he was 19 and presumably a student at Liberty. So that's this dude. He just got arrested for just the worst kind of crimes, right? So he's being held on $3 million bond. He's set to appear in front of a judge on Halloween, coincidentally. And by the way, Liberty University's press release, where they were promoting how awesome this guy was, and they were so proud of him at CPAC, they've totally deleted that page from the internet. I was writing an article about this dude, and I was watching that Liberty University video of him performing at CPAC. And as I was watching it, and I definitely saved a copy, but as I was watching it, they took down the video in the middle of my viewing it. They want to pretend that never happened at all. So that's interesting. I went to the church's website. Like, what does Oakwood Church say about any of this? Because the church has to have thoughts about this, right? And the entire front page of the church, I shit you not, this is the front page of the church right now. It is just a giant disclaimer that says, yeah, we all know why you're here right now. The real website is down here. But first, what do they say? All right, let's read through this. We received some very disturbing news about our music and youth director, Zachary Radcliffe, who is also the son of our senior pastor, Frank Radcliffe. We realized while talking to him that there was more to the situation than what was being expressed. Like, what did he tell you was happening? I'm very curious. Just so you have a timeline here, it looks like the police investigated this dude and came forward with charges on like October 2nd. And I think they must have gone to the church on October 2nd and said, hey, your guy is in big trouble. And so according to this, he was suspended with pay on October 3rd, pending further investigation. That's fine. They don't know what he did. They suspended him, still paying him. All right, whatever. More information was given to us on Saturday, October 12th at 4 p.m. in the afternoon. That's very specific. Pastoral staff met with our church that evening, and Sunday morning, Zach was terminated from his job without pay, effective Saturday. What the hell did they learn that day? I don't know. But they go on to say, we're not aware of the full extent of his crimes. We're doing everything we can to cooperate with the police. That's good. The information that we did receive was shocking. We are told that Zachary had been soliciting inappropriate photos, and possibly videos from teens. We've also heard other stories, which is a very vague thing to say given the circumstances. This information has ripped our hearts apart because you know who's really suffering here? It's not the victims, it's the church. Anyway, look, I will give the church some credit. The police said, this is the situation. The church was like, well, we'll investigate this. And then the police said, here's more information. And the church is like, oh, no. So they got rid of the guy and they're basically cooperating with the police. And that's good. Like, they should be commended for fully cooperating with the police. All right, that's fine. The church also said if anyone has any further information about this dude, you should not contact us. Go contact the Michigan State Police. And that's also a very important thing for them to say. Certainly the staffers at this church cannot be trusted. I think the kids would have been infinitely safer listening to drag queens read stories at a library than attending youth group at this church. Okay. Another interesting thing about the timeline here is that he was suspended on October 3rd when the church leaders must have had some idea of what allegations were coming. Well, on October 6th, his daddy, Frank Radcliffe, delivered a sermon ironically titled, "Not Today, Satan." It was part of a series, pre-planned, but there you go. But I watched that sermon. He didn't say anything about the allegations. In fact, the only time his son's name came up was at the very end of the sermon when he said, "We always finish service with song. We're not going to do that today. We always finish a song by hearing Zach tell us to go be the church. We'll go be the church. Give somebody a hug." Which also, I don't think you want the members of this church touching anybody right now. And then the sermon that he gave on October 20th, after Zach was terminated from his job, included no mention of the kid. Actually, he's 29. He's not a kid. There's no video of a service that occurred on October 13th after they fired him. I don't know if they scrubbed that from the internet or what. But there was a service listed in the church's calendars. Very curious what they said during that service to members. But this is a family that has spent many years trashing all things liberal. Like during the height of the pandemic, when people were literally avoiding going downtown, going outdoors as much as possible, Zach Radcliffe actually led church members in a downtown maskless sing-along that marched to like a local cemetery. And I don't have video of this, but I want to just tell you, I found video from 2022 in which Zach and his father Frank appeared on a radio show of a Christian radio host named Chris Ayotte. And at one point, Ayotte started bringing up this. He said, and I quote, "Then you have this gender identity ideology, which is from the pit of hell because it's confusing our children. These are children. And we're going to enable and reward gender dysphoria." And in response to all that anti-trans stuff, Frank Radcliffe, the dad, says, "I believe so." And he says, what we need to do is we need to talk about this. He says, sometimes that means sitting down and saying, this lifestyle that you're choosing is immoral. It's wrong. And he said later, we won't allow kids to have a drink. We won't allow them to have a cigarette. We won't allow them to do all these other things, but we'll literally do child abuse on that kid. And then he said, our whole church is looking at each other and saying, it is my job to love on you. And it's my job also every once in a while to take you out to the woodshed and spank your butt. Also thing that did not age well. But that's what Frank Radcliffe said while his son Zach was sitting next to him 2 years ago. And during that entire response, Zach was just chiming in with, right, yes, yup, things like that. While he must have known he was a bigger threat to children than any of these purported doctors who affirm trans kids. Like, how disturbing is that? The same people who condemn trans people in the name of denouncing immorality ignored the sex predator sitting right next to them. And the sex predator may have gotten away with his alleged crimes for years, largely because he was protected by the shield of Christianity, which gave him access to children along with unearned levels of trust. I mean, I see a guy in a MAGA hat, and my thinking here is, it's always the ones you absolutely suspect. All right. I'm done there. What questions we got here? Was it the congregation's kids who were abused, or did they not care enough to ask? That's a great question. I wonder that myself. And right now, I have not found any information about who the victims were, what their stories are, where they came from. My assumption is that he met the kids in church through church, but I don't know that. So I can't speculate on where he met these kids that he was talking to and abusing. I'm impressed they actually fired him. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad they did. They did it after, more than a week after the allegations came out. But like, I feel like their hand was forced at that point. At that, the evidence must have been irrefutable for them to do it. And I kind of want to know how much pushback they gave to the police at first. Did the police come and say, "Hey, we got news about one of these staffers that works here"? And did the church say, "No, you're lying. This is fake, whatever"? Or did they just say, "Oh, that's disturbing. We're going to move forward with this then"? I don't know. I'm sure he got a generous severance package. I don't know if he did, but man, would you be surprised if they did, right? That wouldn't be out of question, would it? No commendations for doing the bare minimum. Yeah, for the church, like they're cooperating with the police. I don't know what else they're doing. I don't know what they're telling the congregation. I don't know if they're soliciting as much information as they can, if they're reaching out to people who might have attended the church 10 years ago and saying, "Hey, do you know anything about this? Do you have any stories we ought to know about?" I don't know what else they're doing. So I'm worried that they might be doing the bare minimum. I'm glad they're doing the bare minimum, but I wish they would be more proactive in doing even more. All right, turn on the notifications. Sign up right there for the newsletter, and let me jump to the next story here. This one, this has a happy ending of sorts, maybe. Okay. Here we go. So earlier this week on Monday, there was a union leader in Australia who was getting an honorary doctorate from Australian Catholic University. And this is not like a fundamentalist Christian school. This is one of those Catholic universities that says we're open to everybody, even though we have Catholic in our name. Like, we're run by the Catholic Church, but anyone's welcome. Muslim, Jews, atheists, whatever. Come on board. We'll take your tuition money. We'll teach you based on our values, but you're going to get a good education either way. That's the idea. I went to a school like that for grad school, so I'm telling you from experience, those schools really do exist. I feel like I got a good education there. It was fine. No one asked me to do anything Catholic. You know what I mean? So this school, Australian Catholic University, they were giving an honorary doctorate to a guy named Joe DeBruyn, who is a union leader, and they wanted to honor him for that work he did with the union. And for whatever reason, ACU holds a graduation now in the fall for the students who graduated last spring. And I don't know why there's such a gap between when they graduate and now, but whatever. The ceremony was this week. And this guy, Joe DeBruyn, he's the former national president of the Shop Distributive and Allied Employees Association, big union. And so he was invited not just to get an honorary doctorate, but to speak to the students. And everything was fine at first when he spoke about the achievements he made with the union. And then all hell broke loose. Okay. Let me show you some of the things he said. Where I want to make sure I'm getting this right here. Here we go. He started talking about his beliefs. And that's where all the problems happen. Here's some examples. He's talked about abortion. Abortion is the single biggest killer of human beings in the world, greater than the human toll of World War II. It is a tragedy that must be ended. So basically, abortion is worse than the Holocaust, is what he was saying. Then he talked about gay people. Marriage between a man and a woman was instituted by God at the origin of humanity in the Garden of Eden, as the book of Genesis in the Bible tells us. Since then, every society on earth at all times has recognized marriage as being between a man and a woman. Like, that's not true, but okay, I guess if you want to go back 6,000 years to the origin of humanity, you might think that. Then he bashed IVF. I responded that he was talking about when he talked about IVF years ago. I responded that it was morally wrong to deliberately bring children into the world in an environment where they would have no father, which is not exactly how IVF works. But anyway, there's the dude. So this is the speech he's giving to graduates while he's receiving the honorary doctorate. And that's disturbing as hell. But here's the amazing thing. Once students heard what he was doing and they realized, oh, this dude's insane, some religious extremist, they started walking out. And I am not talking about like a few students in protest stood up and walked out. Like, remember several years ago at Notre Dame, Mike Pence was given like an honorary doctorate. And in protest, this is during the Trump administration, a handful of students, dozens of them maybe, stood up, turned their backs on him and walked out. This is not that. Everyone walked out on this guy. I'm going to show you a video from this thing. It's not great audio. You're not going to be able to hear the guy, and it's just
conference, so as to endorse same-sex marriage. For several months leading into the conference, I worked with the Prime Minister and with many others to defeat any change in the policy. However, on the eve of the conference debate, by the 400 delegates, we found that we were short of the 201 votes that were required to prevent any change occurring. And so the Labor Party then changed its policy and endorsed same-sex marriage.
Everyone is walking out on this guy while he is speaking, which it warms my shriveled little heart. One graduate student told a reporter, maybe he said this as a joke, but whatever. He said the only people who stuck around were the people recording the event so they could share it on social media later. And thing is, this guy, Joe DeBruyne, he didn't seem bothered by any of it. When he was asked by reporters later what he thought about all this, he basically threw the college under the bus. This is from The Guardian. They knew what I was going to say. As to their attitude, you'd have to ask them. I don't want to offend anybody, but you can't say I'm sensitive and therefore you're not allowed to talk about some issue. It shuts down public debate. He's cancel culturing this thing. He said the topics he spanned were perfectly logical, given that he was being honored by a Catholic university on his services to the Catholic Church, describing abortion as a catastrophic issue that needed to be discussed. And here's the thing, like, it is true. The Catholic Church, anti-abortion, anti-gay marriage, anti-IVF. But at a school like this, honestly, at any school, if you are given an honorary doctorate, if you're delivering a commencement, I feel like you don't have to go out of your way to say, you should give a speech congratulating the students who did all the hard work. You should tell them what to expect in the future. And there are ways to do that that are not boilerplate and boring, but focus on them. They're the stars of today, not you. And this guy's like, but I want to give a church service. I want to give a sermon where I talk about all the things and people I hate. And he basically turned his speech into like a personal rant about what he thinks about. Like, it just messes with the whole event. This is interesting. The head of the ACU's National Tertiary Education Union branch said the speech brought shame on the union movement and the university. Abortion rights are fundamental to women's rights. Queer rights are not up for negotiation. Management's choice to give him an honorary doctorate brings shame on the university. Like, damn, this is the person who should have been speaking up on stage. So I love that virtually no one is happy with this dude. Everyone, including people at the college, are like, yeah, that never should have happened, which is wonderful. I will say, though, for that student I just quoted to say management's choice brought shame upon the university. I love that he said that, but that's not necessarily true because it's not like this school has always been on the up and up. In fact, last year, this is a headline that they generated. University orders staff to remove public display of rainbow flags. Librarians at the Australian Catholic University have been ordered to remove rainbow flags across campuses, sparking backlash from staff who say the move is a direct affront to the common good. Like, I love the staff, but like the administration wasn't exactly great a year ago, and they just made an oopsie this week. They've always been pretty bad. I mean, honestly, honoring a bigot kind of seems in line with the school's values when you see what they did with those rainbow flags. It's not that different from when Benedictine College over the summer invited NFL kicker Harrison Butker to deliver a commencement address where he famously told female graduates who just got their degree that they should aspire to something bigger, like becoming housewives. Like, what do you expect when a Catholic school invites a crazy person to give a speech? What did you think was going to happen? Did you not look into this person's views at all? And I guess the thing that makes me happy is if Joe de Bruyn thought he was going to get applause for defending his Catholic values, that never happened. He's totally out of touch with the student body. And I just want to show you, when you go to the Catholic school's website, this is what you see. This is literally their website. What if I'm not Catholic? It's okay. Everyone's welcome. You don't need to be Catholic to study with us. Like, they say on their website, we invite everyone. You're all a part of this. They're kind of downplaying the whole Catholicism thing, saying we run by our values, but we don't impose that on anybody. And then this dude gives his speech where he's like, well, since we're all in agreement on Catholic values, let me tell you why IVF and gay people suck. I don't know. I do appreciate all the students who are speaking out against this. This made me happy too. This is from the ACLU, the ACU National Student Association, the Melbourne LGBTIQ plus Society, and the ACU's LGBTIQ plus Staff Ally Network and St. Patrick's Student Association released a joint statement on Tuesday calling for de Bruyn to be stripped of the honorary doctorate. I love that all the students are coming together to say, yeah, that guy doesn't represent us. Good for them. I love it. And some of those students actually held a protest outside the campus sometime earlier this week. So here's the other interesting thing about all of this. It turns out, you might think, well, maybe the school was surprised that any of this happened. That's actually not the case at all, because if I could find this here, according to de Bruyn, he sent a copy of that script to the administrations, to the administration officials. Sorry, I'm just looking if I could find it. Yep, I lied. I can't find that specific quote. But apparently, this guy submitted a draft of his speech to university officials in advance. And the only thing they told this guy is that they said, you should focus on the achievements of our students. But they didn't force him to change the whole speech. And guess what? He didn't take any of their suggestions. And that same spokesperson for the school later said that the speech was delivered in a personal capacity. But like, no one should buy that. The school invited him. The school saw the speech in advance. They approved everything he said. It's not like his worst comments were ad-libbed where the school could say, we didn't know he was going to do that. So the school absolutely deserves blame for everything that happened. And one of the things I really enjoyed is that there was a Christian writer who commented on everything that happened. This is a guy who agrees with de Bruyn and the Catholic Church on abortion and IVF and LGBTQ people. And look what this guy said. Hundreds of people walked away. A few staunch supporters remained, while others sat uncomfortably and embarrassed and required to continue with their duties. Did anyone leave with a better understanding of the Christian gospel or of a life-affirming view of God? Basically saying, if this dude gave a speech where he thought he was going to convince people to buy into Jesus or agree with him, it totally backfired. You got to pick your battles, man. That was not the place to proselytize. And because he did it, all these students will now have a horrible taste in their mouth when they think about the school they graduated from. And I sincerely hope they remember that when they are asked in the future to make donations to this school. Because if Joe DeBruyn is the model for what they should become, then their money should be given somewhere else to groups that support reproductive justice and LGBTQ plus equality and all of that. Don't give money to this school. Trash. You're done. You got your diploma. Trash the school all you want. It's fine now. I hope the school learned a lesson from this, because at least someone learned something from all of that. That would be good. Okay, I'm going to stop there. What other questions we got here? Thanks for that donation, Joshua. Heart disease is the biggest killer of humanity, not abortion. What a joke. I would have confiscated that doctorate. As for pregnancies, miscarriage or God ends far more pregnancies than any doctor could. And I will tell you this, I was working on a story about this for today. I didn't have it done, but I'm going to talk about it next week. But you're right. Like, if you think abortion is somehow murder and that those are the ones that really matter, I mean, it never sounds sincere coming from the anti-abortion crowd, because they don't care about the death penalty. They don't speak out against things that would actually help children once they're born. They're not supporting Medicare for all, healthcare for all, anything like that. And they make it harder to access help. They're driving LGBTQ kids to do horrible things to themselves. Like, these people do not care. If the anti-abortion crowd doesn't care about you when you're alive, why do I think you actually care about them before they're born? Right? And so I never can take their claim seriously when they're like, this is horrible. By the way, you may have seen this week as well, that when in places like Texas, infant mortality since the Dobbs decision, infant mortality has gone up. It is harder, it is riskier to be born in Texas now that abortion is not an option there. And again, do any of these pro-life people care about that? Of course they don't. They're not doing the same work to protect infants like they are to pass laws to make life for women harder. They don't care. Thank you for that donation, Carla. Harrison Butker was campaigning with Josh Hawley in Missouri, and they both said women should step aside. Did they really say that, or did they just wink at that? I imagine they winked at that, but man, if people have a chance to get rid of Josh Hawley, and it bothers me that I don't think that's going to happen. Same way, like, you could get rid of Ted Cruz in a week. We would be done with him as a country in a week if enough Texans have the guts to vote for Colin Allred. Will they? I don't know. They could do it in Nebraska too. They don't even have to vote for a Democrat in that one. Like, this is a serious possibility that Ted Cruz could lose his Senate seat, but Donald Trump wins, and you would not be allowed to enjoy the fact that Ted Cruz got defeated if we also lost the presidency. Like, that's a very real possibility, and that's very disturbing to me. Oh, goddamn. They gave him an honorary doctorate based on his work and presumably his intelligence to some degree, and he spewed that garbage? Yeah, he did. Again, why don't they do any research? I think I read somewhere, and this is from Joe DeBruyn, that they asked him to give this speech last November. He's had a year, and the school has had a year to prepare for this moment. And what, did they never look into what this guy thinks? And not only like, okay, there are Catholics who believe that stuff, but like, what does he actually want to promote? You would have known. They could have said, hey, give us your speech in advance, and if you don't follow it, we're going to turn off your mic. There's so many ways to deal with this. And they didn't. They just gave the guy the floor and destroyed their whole reputation in the process. I mean, it's the administration's fault at this point. Can they take back the honorary degree? Probably not, because it doesn't really have any value anyway. It's all symbolic. It's a nice honor, but it is symbolic, so I don't know what they're going to take away, because realistically, what do you do with an honorary doctorate? It's a line in your resume, but the guy's old and retired. It won't matter. No one was thinking of him as like, oh, he's gotten an honorary degree. He deserves respect now. No, his reputation was leading that union, and now his reputation is, I don't know, bigotry. So the honorary doctorate, I don't think they're going to do anything about it. Thank goodness, but it's sad to ruin a young person's day like that. Yes, Totally. It's so selfish of these goons. Graduation speeches are not for controversy and soapboxing. Yes, absolutely. It doesn't matter which school you are speaking at, doesn't matter public school, private school. Graduation should be about the graduates. And again, you can make fun of yourself. You could talk about yourself and what your personal journey was, as long as the focus is on them. Why would you make it about you? That just seems like you didn't understand the assignment. Oh, thank you, Keith, for that. I appreciate it. I want to give a commencement speech at one of these universities. How do I apply? I know, man. I am waiting for Liberty University to send me my invite. I would give a very good speech. Just trust me. All right, go subscribe there. I got one more story for you, and then I am all done. Is it disturbing? Yeah, of course it's disturbing. All right, let me close some of these tabs. All right, we're going to finish before 9 o'clock tonight. Okay. I'm going to tell you about a Southern Baptist church that did something very disturbing. It's called Emmanuel Baptist Church. It is in Little Rock, Arkansas. I will show you their website here because it's a large place. They have a lot of stuff going on there. Okay, a lot of activity, a lot of people. So that's Emmanuel Baptist Church, but they have been having a lot of problems over the past several years. Okay, lots of problems. And here is some of those problems. Okay, first of all, it turns out they hired a guy, the assistant director of children's ministry from 2014 to 2016. His name was Patrick Miller. And he has been accused of sexual abuse by 3 separate women. And this is a very disturbing sentence, but bear with me. Apparently, one of them said he apparently, quote, fondled and sexually abused multiple elementary age girls after grooming them through games of hide and seek where they would be locked in darkened rooms at the church. That's the thing that happened. So 3 women have accused this guy of sexual abuse. And in 2019, he was charged with second-degree sexual assault by one of them. He later pleaded guilty to misdemeanor harassment. So he was accused. He pled guilty to a lesser charge. That was one woman. This past June, in a second case, he said he was not guilty of sexual assault and kidnapping, and that is still ongoing in the courts. And then last month, the third victim came forward with her allegations, but no formal charges have been filed yet. But obviously, one of those charges did go through, and he has already pleaded guilty to that. So this guy was employed at this church from 2014 to 2016. Disturbing. Then you have another church volunteer. Her name is Reagan Gray, and she was accused of sexually assaulting a high school boy. And she has pleaded not guilty. But again, that's an allegation that happened. Now, think about what you would do if you were the leader of this church at this time, okay? There kind of is at this point a standard playbook for how you deal with allegations of this nature. You publicly apologize. You explain how you're going to maybe do better with background checks. Or you say, you know what? We did our background checks with these people and everything was fine. We didn't realize any of this was happening. They might say that. But then you tell your church members, we're going to give you a safe way to come forward with any other stories you might have about the accused staffers or anybody else on our staff for that matter. And you know what? You don't tell us about it. We have hired an independent investigator. We want you to take your stories to that person. They're going to investigate and report back to us later because we clearly cannot be trusted. That's what you should do at this point. There have been enough of these type of stories that good churches have responded in that way, in that responsible sort of way, to say, look, we hired them. It happens, but we didn't know it was happening. Wish we could have done more, but here's what we're going to do moving forward. That is not what this church did. Okay? At Emmanuel, the pastor, Stephen Smith, first, he didn't even tell his congregation about any of the allegations against Miller, the first guy, until last December. And that was long after those allegations were made, years after the church knew those allegations had been made. why did the pastor wait until December to tell the congregation? Well, it's because the local newspaper had just reported that day that Miller was trying to have his criminal records sealed. And they were writing an article about this guy doesn't want anyone to know what happened to him and why he was sent to court or anything like that. And that was going to go public. And the pastor's like, oh shit, the whole church is going to know that this dude's in trouble. I should probably tell them something. And by waiting as long as he did, it means there are people in the church that may have been exposed to this guy who didn't know he was a threat because the pastor just held it in. And how many people may have left the church not having reported anything, and they weren't around to hear that this guy is a bad dude? Okay. And then the pastor, Stephen Smith, he did tell the congregation about Reagan Gray, that woman who was accused of stuff, but he insisted those allegations were non-criminal in nature, which is not true based on the allegations I read about. But then it gets worse. It turns out the pastor told the leadership team that we will handle any future abuse reports with the help of an outside party. However, that outside party is going to have to sign a non-disclosure agreement so that that person cannot report back to any of the deacons who lead this church. Like, why are you not trying to be as transparent as possible? That's weird. Oh, and then he said, oh, and that third party that I'm hiring, it's not actually independent. It's just going to be a lawyer who works for our church's insurance provider who totally doesn't have a conflict of interest here. So, like, the pastor handled all this in the worst possible way. And all of that infuriated some of those deacons, some of those church leaders enough that there was actually a mini revolt. Okay, this is an article from Julie Roys, who is a Christian who writes about the church. Look at this headline that happened. This is back in February of this year. 8 deacons resign from embattled SBC megachurch after leaders require loyalty pledge. And just right here, 8 deacons of a prominent Southern Baptist megachurch in Arkansas have resigned, refusing to sign a recommitment form viewed by some as a loyalty pledge to the church's senior pastor. And basically what happened is after those deacons, what they wanted to do is they wanted to hold a vote and cast a vote of no confidence against their pastor after he mishandled all this abuse stuff. And that vote never happened. And instead, other leadership said, hey, all of you in leadership, we're going to make you sign some new paperwork that pledges loyalty to our church no matter what. And these deacons, 8 of them, were like, I am not signing a pledge to the church and to the pastor when these are the same people who are trying to cover up abuse. So they all resigned in protest. And good for them. That's the least they could do. And the amazing thing is, after that happened, those 8 deacons, or some of them, they spoke to local reporters about all this. They spoke about how they felt, how frustrated they were, how they thought the church should have been handling these issues. And it turns out that was the last straw for Pastor Stephen Smith. He was so mad that his own former leadership team was smack talking him and his church, and they were getting a bad reputation, that he apparently told the deacons, and I am quoting here, I can't have trust restored if people inside the church are talking to the newspaper. As if the deacons speaking to reporters were the real problem and not the abuse and not the way Stephen Smith was handling the allegations of abuse. Okay, so a month later, the situation got even worse because after those deacons resign, everyone starts to find out why they left because they were talking about all the church mishaps. And then a lot of members of the church start to leave. And at this point, a month after those 8 deacons left, Stephen Smith says, all right, I'm going to resign. But by the time he finally left, hundreds of members had already walked out the door. So huge mess. And it was all due to this pastor's shitty leadership. But it could also be blamed partly on the fact that they were trying to make all this up as they went along. They didn't have a playbook in place for how to handle allegations of abuse. What happens if someone comes forward? What should we do? There were no policies in place for how to handle any of it. And that's why this month, for the first time in this megachurch's 132-year history, the current deacons leading the church have said, hey, church, we have written a set of bylaws, the playbook, the rule book for our church, and everyone will have to follow these rules. And just to give you one example, if there's any suspected child abuse, everyone, staffers, members, everybody, they have to report it to the Arkansas Child Abuse Hotline, which is run by the state. And I think that's good. That's very important. Do not tell the church leadership about it. Don't tell some independent lawyer who totally works for the church about it. Go to the state officials, tell local law enforcement. That's how we handle it now. I think that's commendable. That's very good. But I want to show you the part of the bylaws that is getting all the attention. And it's section 11.4 called Biblical Peacemaking and Conflict Resolution. All right. And I'm going to skip ahead to 11.4.2, 11.4.2. Look at this. I'm scrolling in a bit. Church members are expected to avoid making statements to the general public, media, or via the internet with intent to breach church business confidentialities, injure the reputation of the church, or disregard Jesus' imperative to love one another as he loves us, so that others will know we are his disciples. Something, something Bible verse. What the hell is that? That is basically a rule that everyone has to follow that says you are not allowed to talk shit about us in public. No talking to reporters. No writing snarky Facebook posts because the pastor said something disturbing during a sermon. None of that. If you do it, it hurts our reputation and we will kick you out of here. And I would argue that if someone says my pastor said something horrible or our church mishandled allegations of sexual abuse, I would say saying that publicly because you want the church to do better is actually an act of love, which is kind of what they want, but that's clearly not what they think. I also want to point this out. Look at this section right above that, 11.4.1. It's some of the same thing. Church members are expected to prayerfully attempt to resolve disputes among themselves or alongside staff pastors or ministers. So if we have any problem, we're going to deal with it internally. And then they quote 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 1 through 7. Well, guess what that chapter and verse says? Here, let me show you, because this is what they think about outside people. If any of you has a dispute with another, do you dare to take it before the ungodly for judgment instead of before the Lord's people? So if you have a conflict and you go to like the cops to talk about it, or you go to a mediator, or you air your dirty laundry in public, you're letting the ungodly see it. And how dare you do that? We handle all our shit inside, which is what cults do. Like, honestly, the only reason those two church members and the allegations against them, the only reason anything ever happened with that is because secular authorities stepped in when church leaders would not. All right. And consider this. Let's say these bylaws go into effect. What would happen if church members posted something on Facebook about what their church did? Or if they spoke to their neighbors about it? Or they spoke to a reporter about it? They could be excommunicated. And honestly, there's actually nothing about how excommunication would work in the bylaws other than to say it will meet biblical requirements and principles, which is very vague and doesn't tell you what they're going to do. But as we've talked about on this show, and I've written about this many times, if you are excommunicated, if you are, what's the word I'm looking for with the Jehovah's Witnesses, something, but if you're kicked out of your church, disfellowshipped, it has a very traumatic effect on the people who are victims of that, because you're basically cutting them off from their friends, their families, their social safety nets. It could be very, very bad. And the fact that this church doesn't go into detail about that is very concerning. What if a church member wanted to go public about the abuse they suffered at the hands of a church employee? I mean, given this church's history, I don't trust them to handle it internally. I only trust that something will happen if they go public with it. And then back to the bylaws for a second, where they said you can't breach church business confidentialities. Like, what does that even entail? What, are you telling people how much was donated via tithes? Is that somehow secret information? It shouldn't be. And this thing about we don't want you to injure the reputation. Oh, I'm sorry. What if you have the intent to breach confidentiality or injure the reputation of the church? What does intent mean? Because if I wanted to say this church is doing something wrong, I would say it's because I want the church to do better, not because I want to destroy them. So whose intent counts? Does my intent to make the church a better place count for something? I don't know. And why is maintaining the church's reputation, no matter what, a requirement for membership or employment? Whistleblowing should not be punished, especially if the goal is improving the church. I mean, sometimes it takes airing out the dirty laundry for organizations to fix themselves. That is often the case with abuse allegations. So here's the thing. It's not like this sort of rule in the bylaws. It's not like other churches have this in their rules. And in fact, the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, they spoke to the former Southern Baptist Convention president, Bart Barber, because he would know. And they asked him, like, hey, is this something a lot of your churches do? And he said, and I quote, "That's the first I have ever seen of a mention of the media in governing documents." And Bart Barber is horrible enough that he thinks, 11-year-old rape victims should be forced to have their rapist babies. That guy's like, wow, this church is going a little too far. So here's the thing. For now, these bylaws have not been adopted. Church members have to vote on whether they want to adopt these rules in mid-November. And about 10 days before that, an updated version of these bylaws will go up, like the final version before everyone votes on it. And that means church members have another 2 weeks to weigh in with their thoughts on what's right, what's wrong, what needs to be fixed. The thing is, I don't know if this don't talk to people outside the church, if you're going to trash us, I don't know if that rule is anything anyone else cares about. So either they go all in on silencing critics within the church and go down the cult pathway, or they admit that maybe public scrutiny is warranted even if it's unpleasant. And it should not be a difficult choice. But this is a conservative Baptist church, so I honestly do not know which option they're going to go with. We'll find out soon. Okay, I think I am done. What other questions and thoughts do we have here? Church leaders should be mandatory reporters. Yes, totally agree. I work at a public school. I have long worked at a public school. When I was a teacher, I was obviously a mandatory reporter. If a kid came to me in confidence and said, my parents are abusing me, I would legally be required to tell the counselor, who would be required to tell local law enforcement, or whatever the chain of command was there. But church leaders and the Catholic Church has opposed this at every turn. When laws try to make church leaders mandatory reporters, they want to be exempt from it. They don't think they should have to tell anybody what is happening, even if it might save a kid's life or protect them. It's disturbing. And you have to wonder, anytime a church says we don't want to be mandatory reporters, why not? What do you think is going to happen if we make you one? And the Catholic Church's argument, by the way, is if someone tells us during confession that they have been abused or they are abusing someone else, you want the priest to tell the police that, but they're like, well, that would be breaking the rules of confession, as if the rules of confession are more important than protecting the kids who may be vulnerable. That's what their priorities are. Straight up, an NDA in their bylaws. I know. Like I said, it's very cultish. And the people at this church should be genuinely freaked out about this. because they're like literally signing their life over to this church, and it's not going to end well. Can you see a future where churches can't get insurance because too many sexual abuse lawsuits? Yes. I think I talked about this in a video. I can't remember when I did it, but the Catholic Church actually, like individual parishes and stuff, they can get insurance for sexual abuse. And some insurance providers are like, oh man, we're going to have to jack up the prices this month. Like, seriously, do a Google search right now for Catholic insurance sexual abuse. You will find companies that offer churches sexual abuse insurance. And a lot of them have it, not just Catholic ones. A lot of them have it. And you have to imagine they're going to get priced out of it in some cases. Oh, this Atheist News Roundup is the best. Thank you so much, Sean. I appreciate that. Thank you for that donation, poor Claire. Well, if you're poor, I really appreciate it. Just started watching your channel, and I love it. I wish everyone would watch it. Me too. Get me to 1 million subscribers, everybody. Or whatever I'm at. I don't count. Thank you for what you and Den do in helping to give greater exposure to what really goes on inside religious institutions. Everyone gets a hug. Thank you, Carl. I appreciate that. And thank you, Den. I fully agree. Cannot do this without Den. Okay, here it goes. The guy... Oh, what? The guy who invented auto spell check died. His funnel is tomato. I can't tell if you're actually telling me something real that happened or you're just making a joke, but I do like the joke. Thank you for that. All right, we're done. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. Heads up for next week, just because I'm going out of town for a bit. Next week's show will be on Thursday night, maybe a little later at night. I know it's Halloween, so I'll kind of push it back. Hopefully everyone will be done with Halloween festivities. But when I advertise the next live stream, it'll be at a different time and place. And after that, it should be regular for a little bit. But thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Thanks for watching. You can support this show also by going to patreon.com/Hemant. And I appreciate anything you give there. And thank you to Den. And I will see you all next week. Have a good one.